Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Now, according to the United Nations, there are more than 370 million Indigenous people across the world. They have communities in at least 70 countries, and in Taiwan, nearly 3% of the population is Indigenous. Now, I don't usually like starting the show with numbers, but I felt it was important to get the scale of how underrepresented Indigenous people are in positions of power or decision-making across the world. And today, we want to understand why that is and how we can change that. And to help us along, we're joined by Fran Pan, an Indigenous public worker from Taipei, and Darren Rewi from Queenstown in New Zealand, or more precisely, Aotearoa, as it's known in Māori. Thank you both for joining us. It's great to have you on the program. Fran, I'm going to go across to you first. How do you describe yourself?
Hello, I'm Fran Pan, and I'm from the southern of Taiwan. And I would say I'm the kind of like a symbol of the, like a lot of Taiwanese children. They are from the different ethnic group, because my mom belongs to the Indigenous peoples, and she's Taiwan people, and my dad, she's from Minnan.
Thank you very much. Darren, kia ora, tell me about yourself and your community.
Kia ora, and thank you for that. So I hail from the Ngāi tribe, which is predominantly in the south island of New Zealand, and I'm also, on my father's side, I am from a tribe in the North Island. So we are, this Ngāi is a base from the Marquesian Islands, which many people don't realise, but mainly our Indigenous makeup is Polynesian.
Right, Darren. So, you know, when we first reached out to invite you as a guest on this program, your response to us, and let me read this out, was thank you for reaching out from Taiwan, the recognized homeland of the ancestors of the New Zealand Māori. Can you explain?
Yes, so in New Zealand over the last 15 years, there's been quite a bit of study, but we've always sort of recognised that there is some sort of relationship. The research that I've seen and also the stories that I've been told talk about is the Amish people in Taiwan, and they count the same as Māori. So Tahiroa, Toruwha, their waka building is the same as ours. A lot of their colours are the same, and it's been proven in the last 5 years that we have a DNA connection. So the belief is that 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, that the Polynesian or the Austronesian people started their migration from the Taiwan area.
And Fran, what do we in Taiwan know about this connection that the Taiwanese Indigenous people have with across the Pacific and New Zealand and other parts? And is it something that we are exploring further?
In Taiwan, we are trying to promote this Austronesian identity, because actually Austronesian is the language that mainly used across the Pacific area. And actually, people said that is the language that mainly distributed on the islands. And they say the north could go to the Taiwan, and the south would be, I think, is Rapa Nui and Hawaii and Madagascar. And normally, when we meet each others, and then we like to starting with counting the numbers, because by counting the numbers, people will recognize actually there are some language connection and even some similarity. So so despite from the language, and there are a lot of like genetic, maybe we look similar or something. Yeah, so I think this is. It might be a new identity across the country or even across the continent.
Right. I want to go into the bigger picture of what it means to be Indigenous in a country, and particularly in New Zealand, being able to get into those levels where decision making is made. And New Zealand is often, and the Māori are often touted as being far ahead than other communities across the world. Where are Māori people in being able to be part of the government that make the rules not only for the wider population, but for themselves too?
As Māori groups in New Zealand say, it's important to be at the table instead of banging on the door, because if you're at the table, you can influence the conversation. And so we had this period in the 60s, it started in the 70s, where we had all these people which at the time were seen as activists and protesters, but as time has gone on and our knowledge of the Indigenous culture has caught up, we've realised that they were actually visionaries and they were able to put in place some of the elements that are coming to play now, and that's our language nests, getting people in areas of influence.
Right, Fran. So Darren talks about being Indigenous people being at the table. How far is Taiwan in bringing that Indigenous representation to the table?
I think our Taiwanese Indigenous movement started like 30 years ago, and I think that time because mainly Indigenous in Taiwan, that our goal would be related to like the land, language, and even go further to self-governance. But in this step, I would say, we on this language revitalization level that the government already work a lot and they are implement a lot of policy, and we also learn a lot from New Zealand. I would say in this election system, there still has a long way to go if you want to go to the parliament because of the constitutions. So it's difficult to adjust to go through the constitution level. But we have a lot of Indigenous public servants that go into the government to work in the government. And I do believe that this could be a very important a milestone for the Indigenous people to go into the system, especially in this decision-making the process.
Right. Now, one country that has put it into its constitution or made it a policy to put Indigenous or minorities at higher levels or within the government is India. But India has 533 living Indigenous groups. They make up just about 9% of the country's total population. And that makes it the country with the world's largest Indigenous population. Now, India has a policy of making sure that its president is from a minority background. This is a largely ceremonial role, but India's current head of state, President Draupadi Murmu, is Indigenous. We ask what impact that has had. Steffi Teresa Murmu is an Indigenous scholar and university professor from the eastern Indian state of Jharkhand and explains its significance.
See, like for us, like Indigenous people of India, we call ourselves Adivasi here, which we relate to. Yes, so the Adivasis here in India are very proud. This is a proud moment for us that one among us is a president today, highest post in India. She is the first citizen, and there is another thing that we are very happy about because she is a female. Again, because Indigenous people everywhere, anywhere around the world, we do not have that kind of discrimination between a male and a female. It's more of a egalitarian society, and that represents, and then we are quite fortunate that we have a lady president, and she also belongs to the Indigenous or the Adivasi community. We talk about equality, but we have to talk about equity. But still there are a group of a pocket of people, they see her from that one vantage point where they see her as a backward lady, a lady from a Dalit society. So that is where India has to work. Another thing that India has to understand, the Indigenous people are the first people of the nation anywhere in the world.
So we see somewhat of a paradox there where India has put a minority or an Indigenous person at what is possibly the highest position of power, although it is a largely ceremonial role, not really part of the decision-making process. In New Zealand, do you see a push to incorporate a quota system within the government or some kind of a system that will help Indigenous or Māori people rise within the government?
Yeah, in New Zealand, it's in some areas actually it's legislated. So with a lot of government organisations or government-funded organisations, they have to have what we call a level of diversity at the table. And so when we say diversity, we say female, but also we say that includes Māori as well. If there isn't a balance of diversity, including females on your board or in your management, and you're not seeing a pathway for the Indigenous people, then it actually affects the level of funding that you can get from the government.
And in Taiwan, Fran, is there a more targeted maybe roadmap to getting Indigenous people in positions of power?
Well, as I mentioned, I think and this election level system that there's not much we can do because of the constitution issue. But I would like to address that because I'm not sure whether the president is Indigenous, does it make a great difference or not? Because actually our President Tsai, her grandmother is Indigenous and is also from Taiwan peoples. And after she became a president, she implemented a lot of the policy related to this and try to implement the ethnic mainstream policy to that people understand each other more, and also the transitional justice policy. But I would say there's some hope. And actually, I would say even because in Taiwan, even Indigenous people are very small percentage, but a lot of people know this. And because we have a lot of people, they married or engaged with Indigenous culture. So a lot of politicians, especially the younger politicians, they are also trying to protect and help to be a coalition with the Indigenous politicians. So I would say, yes, we do have some improvement in these years.
Darren, is that a trend you're also seeing in New Zealand with the younger politicians helping or understanding that the importance of incorporating Indigenous values, wisdom, and people within the system? And what are the challenges, though, you're facing, New Zealand is facing, in bringing those Indigenous people, as you say, to the table?
Yeah, and I think to Fran's point that the New Zealand people would say that it's not so much important having an Indigenous person in that top role, because it's always about the quality of the leadership that you have there, but they would want to also say that the support role should at least show some of the Indigenous decision makers. But in terms of the young people coming through, we're lucky that around about 30 years ago, we started these language nests, which when you go into them, you can only speak Māori. You can't speak any other language. And what was originally thought was that those children would suffer, but being immersed in their own language, they shot ahead. And now they're the people or the young ones that are now coming into those positions of power, those influence spaces, and they're able to bring a whole different mindset to the table. So I think that's where we are now.
Now, one of the issues of not having Indigenous people in the government is a lack of understanding, and many Indigenous communities clash with governments over laws that don't account for their traditions and cultures. Now, Taiwan is no exception. For decades, Taiwan's strict hunting laws have put Indigenous hunters in direct conflict with the law. But there is hope that this could change under a new pilot project. Here's Rick Gloward.
29-year-old Jun Mao is back on the hunt. It's been a while since he's felt free to do so without risking a clash with the law.
因为像小偷一样上山，然后下山了又像小偷一样回家，就是要注意警察，担心警察，这当然会有一些影响。但现在就是不用怕，就直接光明正大拿着枪上山，又拿着枪猎物回来。
Jun Mao is Daya, an indigenous group in eastern Taiwan. Hunters in his village are part of a pilot government project that lets indigenous communities, rather than the authorities, manage parts of the woodland, including implementing Taiwan's strict hunting laws. In 1989, Taiwan put in laws to prevent overhunting and protect the country's wildlife. legislating that hunters must use registered homemade weapons and notify authorities on what they plan to shoot. The law is unpopular with Indigenous communities, who say their own customs and respect for nature prevent overhunting. 60% of Taiwan is covered in mountainous forest. Most of it is government land, and it's close to these areas that Indigenous people live. Each year, there are hundreds of cases of Indigenous hunters running foul of Taiwan law. Indigenous communities make up just 2.3% of the country's population and have faced years of discrimination. Taiwan's government says hunting laws fulfill its obligation to protect the environment. But Indigenous communities maintain they have a constitutional right to practice their culture.
那你如果不让他们打猎的时候呢，这个东西就变成说，这种训练方式、这种训练的一个过程就会断掉了。那所以我们的男人可能就男孩子可能就无法从这边学到一些传统的一些习惯，一些技能。那所以虽然国家禁止，他还是要去打猎。所以呢，就会产生这样一个冲突。
And that's why Taiwan's Forestry Bureau is now trying to co-manage the forest with Indigenous communities in a bid to bridge that divide while keeping the law.
黄鼠狼，然后山羌、山羊、跟雉鸡还有猴子。
Here, local hunters can themselves regulate the use of weapons and monitor wildlife levels.
透过猎人组织，跟作为政府跟个别的猎人，它变成是一个很重要的一个中介的这个组织。然后猎人组织呢，也可以知道说，政府是愿意相信他们，去支持他们。那这些个别的猎人，他们透过这样的方式，他们也会慢慢信赖政府。那进一步的，其实猎人本身就是一个很好的自然资源的管理者，因为他对于野外的生态很了解，那他也很了解动物的习性。
A minority in their own homeland, Taiwan's Indigenous people have been struggling to protect their cultures and traditions. Now, communities like the Daya are showing how the original inhabitants of this land are best placed to tend to it. Leon Lien and Rick Lowett for TaiwanPlus.
Fran, that's one initiative, but how much really is the government doing at the moment to try and incorporate more of the Indigenous traditions, particularly as they are the original guardians of the land here?
As far as I know, yeah, I just, when I watched this clip, I just remember that before when sometime when we would go to the wild with my mom, and she's always joking like, yeah, actually this is our fridge, the natural, the forest is our fridge. I would say on this topic, actually, there's a very controversial discussion in Taiwan society. The main point, because a lot of people see this hunting things is not it's not environmental friendly, and they always put a lot of stereotype on it. And another thing is a lot of a younger generation or some hunter that they are not really following the traditional ritual, which cause a lot of the debate and conflict in Taiwan.
I want to talk about the wider aspect of Indigenous people knowing and understanding the land, because they have lived on it and thrived on it and kept it, preserved it.
We've got what we call our mātauranga, which is our Indigenous knowledge, which tells us how to look after the land and all that. And what we see, so a classic example is that a river will come from the mountains to the sea and it winds. And the reason it winds is because that's how it slows itself down. That's how it cleans the river, cleans the land and all that. But what we see in the argument we have with farmers is they'll straighten those rivers. And so we're having a whole lot of flooding because when we got a whole lot of flooding, heavy water in the mountains, it would take 4 days to get to the coast. Now it's overnight and it's a big rush of water. So that's where people have ignored Indigenous knowledge.
So I know there are a lot of some like township, they are trying to plant or trying to preserve the millet seeds to keep it the biodiversity and try to because they are learning For example, they can look for some special millet species that they can adopt in this extreme weather. So there are some area like this, that this is one of the case that the government is working with the indigenous people for their traditional knowledge. Yeah.
I want to go back to the idea of Indigenous representation. Now, assuming Rupi is an Indigenous musician and actor from the Amis tribe in Taiwan, and he spoke to Connected about the importance of role models in shaping identity.
我觉得自我认同大概，如果我的理解的话，可能就是内跟外。当张惠妹出现的那一刻，全台湾的原住民非常的兴奋，即便到现在，她的影响力还是非常的强大，影响到整个台湾的原住民族群对自己的自我认同，因为她是一个非常典型的 model。 然后产生一个非常大的社会影响力，透过他的唱歌，跟他的表演这样，他的行为这样子，这样子的角色有很多，现在其实慢慢有，而且他还会转到线上，因为有看到线上的原住民 YouTube， 对，就或者有些是娱乐性的，有些是知识性的，各式各样的。 所以其实内部会有这样的东西，它会慢慢把大家拉进去。当然还有外部的社会氛围也会影响到原住民在自我认同的过程中，他面对的外部环境给予的压力。
Swimming talks about cultural identity there, and one of the key tenets of cultural identity is often language. And I want to take this to you, Fran. In 2017, and you mentioned this earlier, Taiwan's legislature passed the Indigenous Languages Development Act, which basically means every Indigenous child should have access to their language learning, if I understood that correctly. Can you explain how that is going now?
Two things that which I would say that improved is that we have this mentorship, because before we always have the courses for everyone, for general, but in my generation that we still cannot use this language fluently. So they develop a mentorship system. I do see, I think maybe in last years, I'm so impressed by some of the indigenous youth, like my age, they can speak this language fluently. People like ourselves, individual, I see a lot of people still don't have a lot of incentive to learn this language.
Darren, is there a push for incorporating more Maori language or Maori language learning in the curriculum across New Zealand?
Yeah, so from the 1st of January 2024, it actually becomes compulsory in both the high school and the junior school. So you have to have a certain level of knowledge now as a new teacher, but it's been really embedded in a lot of areas. So, so we have what we call a karakia, which is that opening invocation or prayer, if you want to call it. And a lot of government bodies, most schools, even businesses will start meetings with a karakia, because we've taken the opportunities over the last few years to explain what that means, and that it's not not to be afraid of it. And as I said before, you've got all those 30-year-olds that are coming through now that are helping everyone understand the beauty of the Indigenous language.
And Fran, we're running out of time here, but very quickly, what do you think that the one thing that governments need to think of going forward that will really help young people embrace their identity and the rest of Taiwan embrace Indigenous culture?
Well, if there's only one thing I have to do, I think it would be ethnic mainstream educational, because actually I would say in the regular generation, even they have this identity and all the things, but if they are afraid, and if all the environment is not friendly for you to express yourself or express the different, or well, it's not only for Indigenous, even the new, a lot of the people from like South Asia, around the world, in Taiwan. And if all the environment is not friendly or welcoming, or the government is not trying to build a bridge between each other, then no matter how much we do, how much language that we learn, we will still too shy or too afraid to speak out.
And Darren, to you too, in a nutshell, what is the one thing that needs to be done sooner rather than later?
I think it's for all Indigenous cultures and their government that they sit within. It's just recognising the beauty of your Indigenous culture and the fact that for whether it be Taiwan or New Zealand, it's your point of difference when you go out into the world and people, you know, they know you from Taiwan or they know you from New Zealand or Aotearoa, you know, they want to know your point of difference. They don't want to hear same old, you know, the same old. They want to hear your language. They want to hear your stories, your music, all that sort of stuff. And so that's what we should focus on. What's the opportunity or the gift that we can take to the world in our Indigenous knowledge?
The gift that we can take to the world. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fran Pan from Taipei and Darren Rewi from Queenstown, New Zealand, for sharing the struggles of Indigenous people and sharing your thoughts and wisdom. And thank you to our viewers for your company. Stay connected.